for maybe 20 minutes here, and then we can go back to it.
That way, people like European colonists, through this land acknowledgement, we pay respects to the Piscataway elders and ancestors. However, we also acknowledge that this is the bare minimum owed to these and all indigenous peoples. We don't want this to be performative. We want folks to really acknowledge like why we are what we are and whose lands we are upon, and the work that we need to do and we must invest to respect that and to balance that, right? So please take a moment. Let's take 30 seconds to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings together here today, and also consider how you can get involved, how you can act to reverse these tragedies and these legacies. So let's take 30 seconds of silence, please, and respect. Thank you. Now, I'd like to announce that we have over 1,400, nearly 1,500 people registered for this event today, exactly 1,463. This is really exciting because the first symposium that we hosted in 2012, I think we had around 500 people. And so the symposium has grown since then. So it's really exciting that since we transitioned to a virtual environment, I think last year we had around 900 registered. So the fact that we've had so many people registered today, I think is great. Hopefully everybody's able to attend and really be able to participate in this event. So we'll keep registration open throughout the day. And hopefully we can get more registrants, but we have a 1,500 attendee cap. Now I want to thank our sponsors. A warm and sincere thank you to all the sponsors. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to really host this event. And so we have colleagues from Environmental Defense Fund, the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and Chispa, Maryland, Earth Justice, colleagues at Sierra Club, the EJ program, Maryland Sierra Club, Union Concerned Scientists, colleagues at the Baja Chair, University of Maryland, Choose Clean Water Coalition, Green 2.0, and additional shout outs to sponsors like the Center for Health, Environment and Justice, NAMITE, Johns Hopkins Environmental Health and Engineering Department, the Rachel Carson Council, SRAP, and the School of Public Health. So as we move forward with the agenda, we talked about those who came before us, the legacies of white supremacy, of displacement, of exploitation of our Native brothers and sisters. I want to take the next few moments to really think about where we are in the movement and those we've lost in the movement. So this is our time for environmental justice in Memoriam. And not just folks we've lost due to the EJ movement, but people we've lost over the last few years because of the pandemic. Amidst the thousands of lives lost to COVID-19 in the last year and a half, the environmental justice movement has lost several of its own well-known champions and countless others, lesser known folks who've been as equally committed as advocates and activists to advance environmental, social, racial, and economic justice. Some like my colleague, Cecil Corbin Mark, WEACT, passed away, known Cecil for many years. Heart was broken when I heard the news of his passing. Someone so young and had so much more to give to the movement. Another person, Elsie Herring of the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, who, when I was in North Carolina as a grad student, I was working with Dr. Steve Wing, who unfortunately passed away in 2016. One of the first community leaders I met working on EJ issues around industrial hog farms was Elsie. And so she was a personal friend. She was a mentor. She was a colleague. Others like LaDonna Allard, who established the Sacred Stone Camp at Standing Rock. Richard Trumka, who was a devout champion for America's labor unions. And Robert Garcia, a civil rights icon, and also an icon in the park equity movement, right? For those who know about his work in LA to really address these issues of environmental justice and access to green space. So EJ justice is not about people being dumped on, right, about environmental hazards. It's also about our access to nature, our access to green space, our access to parks. So there's no way that we could recognize all of our lost loved ones here in this space by name, but we have set up a virtual space to do so on our HOVA conference platform. Please visit the community tab to see the discussion topic, environmental justice and Memoriam. There you can leave a note about who you have lost and how you will carry forward on their legacies, how you carry forward in their name, how you continue to fight in their name for environmental, social, economic, and racial justice. You can also use the hashtag EJ Memoriam on Twitter and Instagram as well. And what I want to do, I want us to take a minute. Let's take 1 minute of silence to remember those that we've lost during the pandemic, those that we lost to the movement, you know, personal friends, anyone that you've lost. Let's take a minute to remember them, those memories in silence, please. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna pass the mic to you again. Go ahead and give an overview for the rest of the morning, please, sir.
All right. So thank you for that, Dr. Wilson. So I am really excited for today. We've got comments from Administrator Michael Regan. We've got 3 concurrent session blocks and another plenary, morning plenary opening with Dr. Wilson here shortly, then another plenary this afternoon. So let's not delay it anymore. I will go ahead and I'll provide an introduction to Dr. Sacoby Wilson for his keynote address this morning. So Dr. Sacoby Wilson is an associate professor with the Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health and the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics here at the School of Public Health in Maryland. For more than 15 years, Dr. Wilson has worked primarily in partnership with community-based organizations to study and address environmental justice and health issues and translate research to action. As the director of the Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health, or CEEJH, Dr. Wilson is focused on providing technical assistance for communities fighting against environmental injustice and environmental health disparities in the DMV region and across the nation. In the name of transforming research to action, Dr. Wilson also serves on a number of executive and advisory boards, including those for the Patuxent Riverkeeper, ACLIMA, the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and most recently, Dr. Wilson was selected by Administrator Michael Regan to join the US EPA Science Advisory Board. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Sacoby Wilson to give today's opening keynote remarks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you again. Appreciate those remarks. I'm happy to give this overview about the 10 years of CEEJH and what we're all about. For those of you who have joined us, if you want to learn more about CEEJH and who we are, please go to www.ceejh.center. So that's again www.ceejh.center. And so I want to start out with first and just give you a little bit of background on what CEEJH is. CEEJH is the acronym stands for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health. The lab was established, and you can find this information on the Our Mission page at the website. The lab was started in 2011. So this is the 10-year anniversary of the lab, which we relaunched as a center in 2021, which I'll get to later on in my comments. But as Yan said, our focus is to provide engagement to highly and differentially exposed populations in underserved communities. Our work has included the development of and participation in partnerships with community-based organizations, health practitioners, policymakers. So when you go to the site, you're going to see that we talk about, we're into doing empowerment science, right? We're into doing liberation science. So we try to do work to empower residents through science. Empowerment is not about empowerment, everyone, or power. It's I power. How can we use science to connect you to the power that you already have, right? And the reason why I think it's important in today's day, when it comes to a lot of science that you see out there, right? You may have people who are doing science that's very extractive, right? But we're trying to do science is less about extraction, more about action. We try to do science is less about what's wrong with you and what's right with you, right? We try to do science is less passive and more active, right? We try to do science is less about what's going inside your body. There's a lot of science is reductionist. Like what's up with your genes, right? And what's going on mechanistically inside your body. We try to do science that's more macro level, meso level. What's going on in your community, right? What are those factors that the root causes that drive the disparities? Address those root causes. Stop doing science that focuses on the symptoms, right? And we also understand that a lot of folks are doing helicopter science. We also understand they come in, they say, we see a problem, there's a disaster, let's go collect data, right? We come in, we see a problem, there's a pandemic, let's go collect data, right? But what have we done to translate that data to real action for those populations? What have we done to translate that data on the disaster to real action for those populations? It becomes extractive, y'all. So that's what we call pain pipping science. I like to share a story with you. I was with Harold Mitchell down at the Cracker Barrel about 12 years ago, and maybe I think it was in Charleston. If Harold's on a phone call, he can correct me on this. And he said, I'm tired of folks coming into my community, taking data, taking for us, and not doing anything to address the problem. Communities with these EJ issues, this is not a safari, folks. That's not a zoo. When you are observing what they're going through and not doing anything about it, you are part of the problem, right? That to me is macabre to do science. We just study people's suffering, right? You study people's pain. You study folks' anguish. You study people who are sick. You study people who are poisoned. You study people who are dying. You study people who are dealing with disparities. You study people dealing with health inequities. You study people who don't have access to food, don't have access to clean air, don't have access to clean water. That's not good enough. So what we do in CEEJH is science that serves, science that empowers, science that inspires, science that teaches, right? Science that's about action, science that's about liberation of the mind, liberation of the spirit, liberation of the body, liberation of the community from the injustices that folks are suffering. That's what we do. You may not hear that from every scientist that you come up with, but that's how I've been trained up in this movement. And I'm gonna give a shout out to the folks who got me to where I am today. But let me slow down a little bit for you. Let me take a step back. I think it's important for all of us in the movement to recognize, our motivations for doing this work. As many of you know me, I'm passionate about environmental justice. I'm passionate about fighting for change, right? And where did that passion come from? I think my mom may be on here. So Mama Wilson be on here. Shout out to Mama Wilson. She may not be on here, but she said she'll join. She wanted to hear me talk today. But I grew up, I'm from Mississippi. I grew up, I'm from Vicksburg. I live, not too close to the city limits, but in that city limits range, right? Near a major highway, near a sewage treatment plant, near a concrete kind of crushing plant. My mom always reminds me, son, don't forget the landfill, also a landfill, right? So I grew up near, environmental hazards. My pops is a pipe fitter. So my pops worked at unfortunately, at many of these kind of pollution-intensive facilities I fight against, nuclear power plants, coal-fired power plants, those are the kind of things that, motivated me to be who I am, right? Growing up and seeing those issues. And then just as a quick, kind of another part of this is the fact I also was diagnosed with alopecia as a young person. And so that's an autoimmune condition. So I was really interested in kind of understanding what environmental stressors caused me to lose my hair. That got me on the road to becoming an environmental health scientist, right? Then I got to Alabama A&M, which I had a chance to be mentored by folks in environmental sciences and ecotoxicology, like Dr. Ruther Brown, like Dr. Marjorie Campbell, Dean Schufert. I gave him a shout out recently on Facebook, Dr. Evelyn Ellis and others, right? They're part of the reason why I am who I am. And then, I got to grad school, trained up by Dr. Steve Wing, the people's professor, trained up by Omega Wilson, Western Revitalization Association, trained up by Naeem Muhammad, North Carolina EJ Network, Black Works for Justice, trained up by Gary Grant, Concerned Citizens Artillery. Those are the folks that trained me up in the EJ movement, right? And eventually I got here to Maryland. And you think about, got here to Maryland, and I'm reflecting, y'all, why do we need CEEJH 10 years ago? Well, several reasons why. University of Maryland didn't really have a focus on environmental justice at the time. State of Maryland didn't really have a lot of focus on environmental justice. Not a lot of EJ groups, and still to this day, we have limited, community-based EJ groups. But at the time, I think it was more sparse. I think you had the EJ partnership. I'll give a shout out to them with Johns Hopkins University. Some of the folks, Barbara Bates Hopkins and others, were doing some EJ work. But beyond that, in the state of Maryland, not much was happening on the EJ front. Even when the region, the DMV region, I think not much was happening as it relates to organized frontline, fence line EJ groups. You had a lot of advocates, right? And so, but not a lot was happening at the community level. And so it was important to kind of bring this focus on EJ and what I learned from the folks in North Carolina, what I learned from the folks in South Carolina, who I'll talk about in a little bit, what I learned from other community groups, and what I learned from my mentors and how to do EJ work that's about the people, right? Other people, for the people, and by the people, okay? And so that was some challenges early on where folks didn't believe EJ was an issue at University of Maryland. I want to start a lab, a center, and I didn't get the support from the leadership of the School of Public Health at the time. I won't say any names, but they know who they are. And that's real talk, folks. As my frat brother Mustafa Ali likes to say, that's real talk. And he couldn't get funding. Couldn't get funding to do work to really, address issues that people were suffering with, right? Environmental justice is about where we live, where we work, where we play, where we pray, where we learn, right? I like to say environmental justice is proximal, every day is pocketbook. Environmental justice is about food, faith, family, health, and jobs. Y'all heard me say that before. But I couldn't get funding to do work to fundamentally help support communities with these issues. Couldn't get it from foundations in the region, right, at the time. Still, it's difficult to get funding for EJ work from government agencies. Still to this day, that's the problem. So we had some challenges early on. We had some challenges, but things started to, come around. We did some early work on the Anacostia River with the Anacostia Community Museum. Tony Thomas, Vicki Chance, a little bit of work with Anacostia Water Society to look at issues of environmental justice related to folks who are subsistence fishing and also recreationalists on the Anacostia. So that was some of the early work we were doing. I continued to do work, when I got here, I was doing work in South Carolina on Graniteville, trained to rub the chlorine spill. I was doing work in North Charleston with the Low Country Alliance for Model Communities, working with community folks like Mr. Herb Fraser Rahim, Omar Muhammad on issues around the Port of Charleston, right? And doing air quality monitoring while I was at the University of South Carolina. We brought that work to Maryland. We started doing work on doing mapping and training community members in citizen science. we started doing block assessment work with LAMC back then, right? We were doing work to help them with that mitigation agreement. They were the first community group in the country to get funding under NEPA to mitigate the impacts of a hazard. First community group, right? They were able to get their master plan for that community into the city's master plan. So these are things that those of you who are fighting for environmental justice should be thinking about. What are the peers, what are the models out there you can emulate, right? That's where I met, as I said earlier, Harold Mitchell with Regenesis Project. Spartanburg, the Art Right neighborhood took $20,000 and has leveraged it over time to $300 million of investments. That's another model that y'all can be looking at. So these are people where I was engaging in South Carolina before I got to Maryland. And then, I think what was eye-opening and groundbreaking and helped us to really move forward in the region was really the first symposium. It was in 2012. I think it was at the Student Union. I think it's the first time we had a DMV focused EJ event, a major EJ event. There's been other EJ events, of course, and of course it's a national EJ conference, but like a DMV specific one. I believe we have like 500 people who showed up for that symposium. I just remember the buzz, right? I believe Jalon White Newsom, Mustafa Ali, and Leslie Field were the MCs for it, if I remember correctly. It was really exciting. A lot of buzz, a lot of energy. I think we created this space to really talk about EJ issues within the region. And I think that was pivotal, and it's been pivotal in helping us as CEEJH provide technical assistance and support to groups within the region on EJ issues. And then we instituted the CEEJH lecture. So, I'm an academic, we want to have these talking events, like right now I'm talking a lot, right? And just to focus on environmental justice. So we had the annual CEEJH lecture. I think the first lecturer was my community mentor, Omega Wilson. Since then, we've had non-lecturers. Lois Gibbs, if y'all know Lois Gibbs from CEEJH and Love Canal. Fred Tubman, Patuxent's Riverkeeper. Andy Fellows, former mayor of College Park, one of the co-chairs of the first of the EJ Commission in the state of Maryland. We also had Dr. Robert Bullard as a keynote, the icon for Bernice Miller, EJ icon for Bernice Miller Travis as a keynote, my frat brother Mustafa Ali as a keynote, the great thinker and climate justice leader Jackie Patterson as a keynote. And then for this year's CEEJH keynote, so like as a special, we have special, this is a CEEJH keynote. We're gonna have a second CEEJH keynote is Cecilia Martinez, Dr. Cecilia Martinez with CEQ, Council of Environmental Quality. So we've had some really influential, important, powerful folks doing great work in the EJ movement. Talk about their work and talk about how we can move forward again, advancing environmental justice. And you think about some of those early engagement and early partnerships that we had with CEEJH. One of the first, groups that we engaged early on in our work was B2B Coalition, Community Gray in Brandywine. And, we provide some technical assistance to Comita, supports Comita in their fight against power plants in Brandywine, including helping early on with getting support for administrative complaint against some of the state agencies about the differential permitting of power plants. We've also early on worked with Fred Tubman and the Patuxent Riverkeeper on some issues. I met Wakaria Poole, who's with Centro de Apoyo Familiar, and at a Busboys, I think Busboys and Poets, we had our first lunch to talk about her interests in looking at environmental health and justice issues that impact our Latino brothers and sisters in the county and in the region. And that work led to some engagement of folks who work in child care centers. That work led to a project where we're looking at exposures of women who go to hair salons, to toxicants, and also, during that time, also engaged with Ramon Palencia Calvo, with CHISPA, looking at issues that also impact Latino brothers and sisters, looking at promotorial models, looking at school buses and lead issues and other impacts, traffic impacts, working in Langley Park and working in Bladensburg. Some of that early work also was with Leah Kelly, Rebecca Ruggles, Rebecca Rare, in our engagement of the folks fighting against the Energy Answers incinerator in Curtis Bay. Worked with folks at the Ben Franklin High School, had meetings there, working with folks from the School of Social Work and others, and providing technical assistance in that fight, right? Helping to do a health impact assessment. Some students help with that. So there's a lot in that early work that really we started to get our footing for what we wanted to do in the region. Then later, we started engaging with Food and Water Watch, folks at the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, the SRAP, and looking at issues around CAFOs, the Salisbury NAACP, folks at Eastern Shore, on looking at industrial chicken farms in the region. And that has led to a number of opportunities to support communities, provide testimony, to be present, to provide research support. Part of the work led to us doing work in Delaware on chicken farms, and shout out to one of my former students, Leah Baskin. She did a health impact assessment of a proposed chicken processing plant in Delaware, and working with Maria Payne with SRAP. I think that HIA was very useful. The community was fighting against that facility in Sussex County, Delaware, and it led to I forget what it's called, and some of y'all on the phone call know what I'm about to say, on the webinar I'm going to say. It led to the Chicken Council of Delaware sending a letter, a cease and desist letter, to the governor of Maryland, to the chancellor of the University of Maryland system, to the president of the University of Maryland, to the dean of the School of Agriculture, College of Agriculture, to the dean of the School of Public Health, saying, why is the School of Public Health doing work in Delaware? Why are you here? Get out of our state. It was a letter of intimidation. It was a letter to shock and awe us. It was a letter that potentially could put my job at risk. And it speaks to what happened to other folks who fight against these confined animal feeding operations. Elsie Heron, who I said, who recently passed away, how she was targeted, intimidated by folks in North Carolina with industrial hog farms. Dr. Steve Wing, when the University of North Carolina, didn't support him and his team when the industry came after him in North Carolina. And I learned years later, the reason why he was able to really get through that hump was because he got support from Johns Hopkins. He got support from the Center for a Livable Future, okay? And then also additional work early on, working with Empower DC and Ivy City, looking at air quality issues, and also folks at George Washington, Howard University, and Trinity University, Dr. Shizuka Z. Working with other researchers, and other teams early on issues in the DC area. Working with Rhonda Hamilton with the Buzzard Point community. So these are the communities that we've been engaging. These are communities that we've been working with. I would say later on, we also worked with the Port Towns Environmental Action to fight against the Ernest Meyer concrete facility, right? And that work was interesting because I went to provide testimony in support of their work, and the zoning examiner told me that EJ wasn't a real thing. So they could not basically record me as an EJ expert, that EJ wasn't real, and that can only be a witness as an environmental scientist, but not as an environmental expert. Similarly, during that same discussion, the people's lawyer for the zoning board, he said there's no EJ issues in Prince George's County, Maryland, because Prince George's County, Maryland is primarily Black and the leadership is Black. So basically was saying when it's Black on Black stuff, it's not a real thing. That's what's happening in our county. We got folks who don't know how to follow the law, who don't believe EJ is a real thing, just because you Black and the community is primarily Black, if you dump on them, right? If you jump and hash on them, if you create a sacrifice zone in Brandywine, if you create a sacrifice zone in Bladensburg, oh, it's not a big deal because most of the folks are people of color, most of the folks are Black. That's what we're doing with the county. I hope there's some reporters on here recording what I just said, because this county needs to be called out in its lack of recognition of these issues. The leadership from the executive's office to some of the county council members who are not doing their job to protect the most vulnerable folks. You know, in that fight in port towns, we had council members like Council Member Ivy, who recognizes the importance of environmental justice. Council Member Tavares, Denoga, but we got other folks who don't think EJ is real. I'm gonna keep it moving, y'all, before I get in trouble. And let me say also, part of what's been, and looking back in time and why we've been, so successful and how we've had this impact, I gotta give love to the students who come through. Because remember, you heard me say earlier, we haven't gotten a lot of funding support for this, for the lab. So really, the lab has been the people for most of our time in existence. The lab has been students. So some of the early students, Rebecca Rear was my first student who worked with me on looking at issues around GIS mapping and needing for better environmental tools to assess environmental justice. We have other students, my first two PhD students. You look at Rihanna Murray was my second PhD student who's still working at UMD. Kristen Burwell, who came up from South Carolina to continue her PhD program with me, who's actually now working in the Durham Health Department. We have undergrad students who, like Aaron Aber, who's gone on to become a lawyer now, who went to George Washington. Lindsay Wright, who's still, I think, in Harvard Law School. We had a number of students from environmental science and technology, environmental science policy, who now work at the EPA. We have students who come through the lab who've done, gone into Berkeley, gone into Emory, gone to Johns Hopkins. Other students who had a major impact to the lab who are no longer in the lab, Kafui, Sakira, Rosemary, right? And I want to give a special, and we have a lot of undergrad students now who've been putting a lot of good work on projects, right? We probably had over 175 undergrad students who worked with us over the years since I've been at the University of Maryland. But I had to give a special shout out to Yan Michael Archer. Yan has been the backbone as a PhD student of the lab for the last several years as we transition from having no staff to finally getting 3 staff, Nushi, Rachel, and Joe. So students have been really, really important. And Yan is, in the more recent years, has probably been one of the more important students who really helped to build, CEEJH, right? My most important job is not only to do great science. My most important job is to really train the next generation of scientists, advocates, and activists. So I just want to give a shout out to the students. And CEEJH has been in the policy realm. We were part of the process early on to pass cumulative impacts bills between 2014 and 2016. None of those bills passed, of course, but we were in those fights, right? We were in those discussions with the EJ Commission when the EJ Commission wasn't really doing much. And like they had a cumulative impacts worker group. We had to have a parallel cumulative impacts worker group. That was Leah, Brent, Andy, and a few others. Rebecca and a few others were part of that group, right? We have done a lot of stuff, to really advance environmental justice and the policy realm. We've had participation on the Prince George County EJ Commission. I was part of a group that wrote a letter saying to the governor, we need to have the EJ Commission step up. We've had conversations with Secretary Grumbles and his team about they have to do a better job with EJ within the Maryland Department of Environment. Right. I'm on NEJAC, y'all. My NEJAC meeting, my last NEJAC meeting is today. The first part of the meeting started yesterday, which happened to be my birthday. So I was on a meeting with NEJAC last night till 11 p.m. But we've had an impact on policy at multiple levels, right? And more recently, when you think about what CEEJH has been doing around policy, we are engaging in the county's climate action plan. So that's an important thing. And then with newer partnerships, we've worked with NAMATE, Namate is a group founded by Vivek Maru. They do a lot of global EJ work, trying to get help folks get legal tools and legal empowerment to address environmental justice issues. Myanmar, Malaysia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Africa, South America. So they have folks around the world. You'll learn more about Namate's work in the U.S., but also global work during the symposium. We have partnerships. We have this new One Ag collaborative where we're trying to address community groups across the DMV region who are impacted by industrial chicken farming, and that's working with ASRAP on that project. We've started groups like 17 for Peace and Justice, which is based off the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice, to engage communities on these issues. And really, we started, gotten students more involved in that work through a 17 Peace and Justice student organization on campus, right? There's been a lot of stuff that we've done. We pushed for DEI in science, in DEI in environmental justice. And so that's been a part of what we've been doing. Again, getting back to that empowerment science, And you think about our new work, a big part of what we've been doing to empower folks again. We get back to this work, empowerment science and liberation science. We've been working with communities to build hyper-local air quality monitoring networks. That's been a big chunk of our work over the last few years. Working in Savannah, Georgia with Dr. Mills McLean and Dad Wu, we're gonna hear about that work either this day or during the symposium. Working in Uniontown, Alabama with Ben Eating and Esther around air quality monitoring. Working in Cheverly, Maryland with the Cheverly Town Council and mayors, Layla and the new mayor, looking at air quality impacts from warehouses and traffic and a metal recycling facility. And we have a relationship with MDE to help do enhanced monitoring using that low-cost hyper-local air quality monitoring data that we've been doing there. We're going to expand that network across Prince George's County. We're trying to engage other communities in Lorton, Virginia. We even have some engagement with the folks in St. Croix to give some technical assistance to them as they do their air quality monitoring around oil refinery there, right? In the Prince George's County work, we're also trying to now start engaging the schools to try to have a school-based air quality monitoring network to really make sure that our kids are not being disproportionately impacted. Think about with children, y'all. Y'all know my riff I'm about to say. How you gonna put America first? You gonna put your kids first? We have too many kids who are going to schools and they've been exposed to toxicants, right? They're going to schools, they're near traffic, they're near heavily trafficked roadways, they're near traffic-related air pollution. Do y'all know that when kids are exposed to traffic-related air pollution like volatile compounds, short-term exposure impacts their what? Coordination, focus, and concentration. So how are kids going to learn where being exposed to pollution? You got some of these same kids who are going to schools where they may have lead paint or may have lead in drinking water. Some of the same schools that may have other kind of indoor issues coming from homes where they may be exposed to toxicants too. So we got to do more to protect our kids, man. How are we going to focus on the next generation if we have our next generation being exposed to toxic pollutions and dealing with toxic trauma? I mean, that's the thing about what we're trying to do in CEEJH, right? We're trying to fight against toxic trauma. We're trying to stop these sacrifice zones. We want to stop these riskscapes, right? And we want to stop violence, the state-sanctioned violence our communities are suffering through. Getting back to this issue of air quality, right? Think about the cumulative impacts of folks being dumped on, y'all. And that's a form of violence. We are basically dehumanizing folks. We dump on them. We're dehumanizing them, y'all. Go to a community that has multiple hazards, that has a landfill, 2 landfills, has an incinerator, has a power plant. We were in Charleston a few weeks ago, and we saw the Rosemont community and what they've been exposed to, right? The communities of Lamsey, Chicora, Cherokee, Ackaby, Howard Heights, Union Heights, what they've been impacted by. The folks in West Savannah, what Dr. McLean has already talked about, what they've been impacted by. We're working also with Kim Gaddy and her community in South Ward and Newark. Look what folks have been impacted by. Look at the cumulative impacts of these hazards. But then the EPA is still permitting these facilities. You gotta do better, folks. People have to stop being poisoned. So CEEJH is fighting for folks in that way, right? To stop communities from being poisoned, okay? to stop communities from being poisoned. So we want to make sure in CEEJH, we're also putting science into the hands of the people. I said this before, putting scientific tools in the hands of the people. You heard what I just said about people being poisoned. Science is not good enough if you're just studying stuff, folks. But that's the system that we have in this US-based science, in this academic science, in this fairly funded science. It's just about studying stuff. We have to fix that system. And that's what CEEJH is pushing back against, right? That's what we do. Now, we also are building other tools that get into the hands of people, building apps so people can collect their own data. Talk about community science. Let me tell y'all a secret. You don't have to have a PhD, have an MS degree, have a BS degree, have an AA degree, an AS degree, whatever degree, a DRPH, any other degree that's out there to be a scientist. Anyone can be a scientist. And I think there's a reckoning in this country because science has let us down. Science has not done its job. Scientists stay on the sideline. Scientists, I'm broad brushing here, just for effect, say it's not my job to translate data to action. Scientists are only thinking about the problems. We have a lot of science being funded, it's all about problems. Not enough science being funded, it's about solutions. We are about solutions and action, right? I said it before, less extraction and more action. So tools that you can map environmental injustice. We helped to build Maryland EJ Screen, initially through some leverage funding from the Concrete Foundation, working with the Center for Smart Growth, more recently funding from Department of Natural Resources in the state of Maryland to map environmental injustice in the state of Maryland, DNR to map access to parks in the state of Maryland, to map climate equity and health issues in the state of Maryland. These are tools that we developed that we're getting to the hands of the people, getting in the hands of policymakers, working on stormwater issues. Y'all know climate change is real, y'all. You've seen the recent report about where we are in the doom and gloom of that report. It's not doom and gloom, but it's real talk. We have to change. We have folks that have been impacted by hurricanes disproportionately. More named storms than history named storms last year. The Gulf Coast is at risk. More forest fires. California, some of the worst in the history of California forest fires. Around the world, there's forest fires. Climate change. Heat issues. Last week, we had 200 million people on the heat risk in this country. 200 million. Heat waves are hell for the poor and the elderly. You heard me say that before. Sea level rise. Episodic rain events, creating stormwater issues. We're working on that in Baltimore. Colleagues looking at sewage backups in Baltimore. Working on that in the DC area. Trying to get environmental public data to folks. Working on natural and technological disasters and trying to help with readiness against disasters for folks who are most at risk. Climate change is impacting us all, but it's not impacting us all the same. It's impacting some of us differentially. We know that. So we're working with communities who have EJ issues to be more prepared for disasters like they're climate driven. These are the new things that we're doing. We're also doing work on with National Wildlife Federation on issues related to President Biden's executive order on climate change. You know, trying to come up with new indicators for some of these tools. We're working with LCV in the state of Maryland. We're working with the Energy Foundation as we move forward with an energy agenda for the state of Maryland. We're also working with Environmental Defense Fund in some of our new work on issues related to electrification, warehouses, and goods movement. So CEEJH has grown. CEEJH has grown, y'all. And you're saying, like, it's been 10 years, Dr. Wilson. Do we still need CEEJH? I say yes. Why? As I said, climate change, everyone. climate-related perturbations, differential risks, inequities in preparedness, inequities in response, inequities in recovery. Dr. Bullock talked about the complexity for protection, right? But you got the same kind of issues embedded in preparedness. Why some communities still get hit over and over again? Brother from Puerto Rico said at our symposium a couple years ago, he's tired of us saying we got to be resilient. Why do folks in Puerto Rico have to be resilient to hurricanes? Why do the same folks have to be resilient when other people don't have to be resilient? We have to make sure that the dollars to help build healthy communities goes to the people with the most need. So why you need CEEJH, the infrastructure bill? Why do you need CEEJH, President Biden's executive order on climate change, right? Why do you need CEEJH, Justice 40? Why do you need CEEJH? We've been in a syndemic, folks. Y'all heard me talk about syndemic before? 400 years of racism, plantation colonialism, or racial capitalism, whichever term you want to use, right? Climate change, okay? Climate change, environmental injustice, and then this pandemic, SARS-CoV-2, right? Of course, when you think about coronavirus and the differential health impacts, why you see high rates in places where you see hot spots for air pollution? That ain't rocket science, folks. If you are been exposed to multiple pollutants, right, particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, NO2, SO2, hazardous air pollutants, what's that doing to your lungs? What's it doing to the bodies of a young child? What is it doing to a body of an elderly person? What's it doing to a body with somebody with underlying health issues? Your lung function has been impacted. So you're gonna be an easy target for a virus like SARS-CoV-2. So the coronavirus pandemic is another reason why you need CEEJH today. We have to keep fighting, right? You have an attack on democracy. That's why you need groups like CEEJH, so to support communities, to fight back, to push back, okay? There's still challenges, still funding issues. You're gonna hear from the Donors of Color Network about foundations being pushed to provide more funding. I'm gonna let them, not steal their thunder, let them talk about that. But we've got to have foundations who are funding this work, fund EJ work, fund climate justice work, fund folks like CEEJH, fund folks who are doing the work in California, part of CEEJH, fund folks of WEAC, fund Reverend Yearwood, fund LAMC, fund those groups down in Houston, Texas, fund Tejas, right? Fund, let me not forget the Midwest, fund that groups in the Midwest of Detroit, Green Door, right? Michigan Environmental Justice Alliance, fund those groups in Minnesota. Fund this new group, the Memphis MCAP, that group. There's so many groups in the South that need support, and we need to see foundations, not just funding us, but fund the groups that are doing the work, the frontline fence line groups. Fund consortia, Dr. Bullock, Dr. Wright's Health HBCU consortia. Fund these groups that are doing the work. You got the Green 2.0 report. You'll hear about that. We need more diversity in the environmental movement. That's another reason why you need CEEJH. That's why we're working with some of these big greens to push them to change, right? We have a lot of pop-up shops now. Now the EJ is seen as like a real thing. Oh my God, there's so many folks that say they do EJ work. That's another reason why you need CEEJH. I'm gonna be like, my last name is Wilson. I'm gonna be a gatekeeper, folks. I hate to say it. I'm an EJ fundamentalist. I'm all about those 17 principles. At the symposium, you will also hear about the 30th anniversary of the First People of Color Summit, where the 17 principles of environmental justice were written. That is our Bible. That's our Magna Carta. That's our framework. If you're not coming from the 17 principles, I'm saying you're not doing EJ. That's just me, y'all. Okay. That's why you need a CEEJH. That's why you need a CEEJH in 2021. That's why we relaunched in 2021. To be a voice, to be a group that serves. Okay. I know I feel like I'm running over time, so I'm gonna start closing out here. There's challenges still. There's challenges still for us as a group. There's challenges still for us in this movement. There's challenges still for us at this university. Let me not say too much about that. but CEEJH will persevere. CEEJH will fight. We will fight. I will fight, right? CEEJH will thrive. We will strive. I will strive. CEEJH is an investment. CEEJH is a commitment. CEEJH is a promise. It's a hope. It's a dream, right? It is not my dream. It's the dreams of those who came before me and who speak through me. My ancestors say, this is what we need to be doing to move forward. Remember, y'all heard me say this before, EJ is about our shared humanity. It's about love, it's about family, right? So we will keep moving forward. CEEJH will teach, we will teach, I will teach, right? We will move. This is a moment that CEEJH has to step up. To be part of the movement, to bend that arc, right? That Dr. King talked about. It may not move much, but I think we can move more in this moment as we work together. The arc for environmental justice, right? Economic justice, social justice, and racial justice. I mean, for me, just to close, I see CEEJH, as who I am. It's a part of me. So for every part of my will, my spirit, my last breath, I will continue to fight for environmental justice, continue to fight for social justice, and continue to make sure CEEJH is a resource, is a space, is a facilitator, is a supporter, it is an entity that serves, right? That acts for the people, to work with the people, to make sure that we are focusing on empowerment and liberation. Thank you. Back to you, Yan.
Oh, muted. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. One thing that we missed from last year that I feel like I just have to figure out how to fix for this year was the lack of applause. So it's going to be janky for right now, but I just want to offer this. Because it's not the same. And thank you very much for getting us off to this very powerful start this morning. So what I will do now is just give a little bit of a run through of, well, actually before that, we have a special message to share. So let me cue that up right now.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here for the University of Maryland's 7th Annual Symposium on Environmental Justice. I want to congratulate the Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health on its 10th year anniversary. For a decade, you've helped shed light on the health and environmental disparities that disproportionately impact our Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and low-income communities. I'm grateful for the work you do every day to elevate environmental justice. The Biden-Harris administration shares in this mission. When President Biden took office, he pledged to prioritize environmental justice and to put the whole of government behind advancing racial equity. At EPA, we're living and breathing this mission. I directed EPA staff to incorporate environmental justice into every aspect of our work, including our regulatory, permitting, and enforcement activities. We're working to support the President's Justice 40 initiative, which aims to devote 40% of the benefits from federal investments to underserved communities. It's a critical opportunity to invest in the cleanup of legacy pollution, to create clean energy jobs in overburdened communities, and to help deliver environmental protection for all people. The President's budget also calls for a new EPA office that would be dedicated to environmental justice and will be led by the first ever Assistant Administrator for Environmental Justice. Correcting long-standing inequities is our responsibility. It's our obligation, and it will be part of our DNA at EPA. Thank you again for inviting me to join you. I'm looking forward to working together to create a healthy, more equitable future.
Okay, so we're very thankful to Administrator Michael Regan of the EPA for that message. And now I will provide a little bit of an overview of what to expect for today. So we have 3 blocks of concurrent sessions going on after this session. This session will wrap up in the next, maybe sooner, but definitely by 11:10. And then there'll be a 10-minute break, and then we'll go into our concurrent sections. The concurrent sessions for the morning are hyperlocal air quality monitoring in goods movement communities, transportation and equity in Maryland, we can and must do better, NAMATI's Global Environmental Justice Corps, which Dr. Wilson alluded to earlier, and then the statewide Environmental Justice Commission report back for Maryland, the Maryland CEJSC Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities. So we will have those sessions and then a 30-minute lunch break at 12:30, and then go into our afternoon sessions, 2 blocks of afternoon concurrent sessions, and then finally closing with our afternoon plenary on DEI and environmental advocacy. So one of the things that we've already done a lot of, we're using this Whova platform, and it's new to us, just like it might be new to some of you. So thank you and apologies. Thank you for the grace, and apologies for any kind of disruptions that you might encounter today. I'm going to drop the link just for anyone who might be joining directly through Zoom today. I'm going to drop the link in the chat for the Whova page. And that's how you should be able to access all of our Whova content for the day. So that will bring you up to this Whova dashboard. There are a lot of opportunities to engage with panelists, with other attendees. As you can see, there's an attendee tab right here that shows you all of the conference attendees. There's also a way to sort based on maybe shared connections. Under the community tab, there are a wealth of topics and boards to share and learn from. There are icebreakers, job openings, the environmental justice and Memoriam section where you can drop your remembrances for EJ heroes that we've lost either recently or not so recently. So please, there's a lot here to dig into. Make sure that you make the most of it. As far as navigating to sessions, go to this agenda tab here and click sessions. Right now, we are in the 10 years of CEEJH plenary session. So if I hit view session, there it is. And then, well, it's not going to show because of the way that I'm doing it right now, but you've got opportunities for Q&A, opportunities to chat, polls, and other community engagements there. So we're really looking forward to the next 3 days of sessions for you all. If there are any response, I know Dr. Wilson encouraged having just Q&A discussion. If there are any remarks for him, you can drop that in the Q&A right now, and we could field, what do you think, maybe 1 or 2 of those, Dr. Wilson?
Yeah.
I think one question that I saw was from Quincy B. How do we utilize undersubscribed DOL, Department of Labor, and state labor upskilling funding to train our communities? This sounds like digital inclusion / EJ integration work. We know the innovation gap in our communities. How do we harness this as an opportunity? And is CEEJH working on this?
Well, thank you for that question, Quincy. I think that's a really powerful question. And I think the question is even more powerful because the moment we're in, I think I went through it really quickly, but Administrator Regan had mentioned it briefly in his comments to Justice 40 initiative, right? So 40% of the benefits as we transition from dirty fossil fuels into a clean energy economy, those investments should go to overburdened, underserved, disadvantaged communities. One of the things that you'll learn about if you attend the NAMATE session about the regional EJ coalition that we've started. I didn't mention it in doing the presentation, but we do have a DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware coalition. We talk about how we put the economy back into the hands of the people. So because of all the dollars that are coming down as part of the infrastructure bill, and all the dollars that are coming down or the programs that are going to be packaged in each federal agency under Justice 40, that's the opportunity to kind of push as it relates to procurement, supply chains, to make sure that our communities are the ones that have been most impacted actually receive the dollars. And so the money gets micro-targeted to the communities with most need, right? But also making sure the dollars are actually going to the businesses in those communities to do the work. Because I believe, and many of you heard me say this, that if we have all these monies that are coming down to improve the communities, address environmental justice, if we're not doing the work, it could actually make the wealth gap worse. So you can end up fixing one problem, but making actually another problem worse. So I think at the core, what we do, we have to put economic justice and economic opportunity structures at the middle. So I think Department of Labor, work with the Department of Commerce, work with any of these workforce development entities that are doing things around green jobs, green businesses, around infrastructure. Look at Civic Works in Baltimore, for example. I think EPA did some work with them. Look at Dr. Mills McLean just had a month-long, I think, training institute for workforce development. That's brown folks who are doing work around brownfields and Superfund sites, cleanup, engage with them. Look at Dr. Beverly Wright's work in New Orleans with Deep South Center. They also do training. So these type of training centers should be uplifted and engaged. And yes, we should have some interagency collaboration between the EPA, Department of Labor, and other federal agencies. They're going to have dollars that need work. And real quickly, just to end, National Wildlife Federation, Mustafa Ali, and we're going to have a session. I'm not sure what date. I remember off the top of my head, but there will be also a session. They're talking about some of their work. They've been doing some work around the CCC. So the Climate Corps, like around the New Deal, getting people back to work. How do we apply that to climate change? So the National Wildlife Federation has been in some conversations about that. So that's another entity that can be engaged. But there's a lot of folks, Quincy, to answer your question succinctly, who've been thinking about your question and trying to make sure that we are set up for success, not just to get the dollars into our communities, but make sure we're doing the work so the dollars cycle over and over in our community. So we're actually addressing income inequality as we transition to away from dirty fossil fuels. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. And we'll do one more question. Leon Vinci asks, back when we held the summit in DC at Gallaudet University, things were beginning to happen. How would you now characterize our growth and progress since then?
Hey, Leon, thank you. Yeah, I had in my notes to give a shout out to that one. So that was the second symposium that we held, and it was a jointly sponsored symposium between CEEJH, APHA Environment Section, because I was still highly engaged in the section. I think we have some dollars through the section that we received from the Kresge Foundation, and also the Environmental Justice Leadership Initiative on Climate Change. And so let's go to Leon's question. We actually talked a lot about climate change and environmental justice at that meeting. So I think if you think about that theme, Leon, I think I'm gonna give a shout out to Peggy Shepard, because I think Peggy had a climate change conference, one of the first climate change and EJ conferences in New York, maybe a few years earlier, maybe 3 to 4 years earlier. And so that EJ focus and climate change discussion, I think, has really grown since then. Of course, you have a Climate Justice Alliance now. I'm not saying that event had an impact on this Climate Justice Alliance, but you do have a lot of EJ groups that are doing climate work. And then I think there's more recognition now that you can't address climate change while addressing environmental injustice. And so I think you have entities who are really speaking to that, working on that. Kresge has its own funding program, the Climate Equity Health Program. You have other foundations that they're funding climate equity and health work, right? You have a lot of groups that are doing climate justice work. So I think, in this region, we've had a lot of discussion and work around climate change. And we've had a number of sessions since then talking about climate resiliency, going beyond resiliency, session we had last year, talking about climate change disasters, climate change and heat issues. We're gonna have a session this year about heat. I think it's heat issues. It's too dang hot. That may be the title or something like that. And so I think the symposium has grown to talk more about climate change. Climate change has been a central theme of the symposium, but I think creating the space for the discussions in the region, I think we've had an impact on a larger discussion about climate change, climate equity, and climate justice since that second symposium. So thank you for that question.
All right. Thank you again, Dr. Wilson. So at this point, we will adjourn for 10 minutes, well, maybe 12 minutes, and start up our next set of sessions at 11:20. In this time, feel free to grab coffee, but also explore a little bit of Hoover And you can also add things to your personal agenda. If you look through the full agenda and see certain sessions that you want to make sure you're aware of or make sure you get a reminder for, then you add that to your personal agenda and it'll give you a little ping. So we've got a really fantastic set of sessions, set of plenaries coming up, not just, so I mentioned the DEI plenary about improving diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in environmental advocacy. But tomorrow we've got a keynote, the 10th annual CEEJH lecture from Dr. Cecilia Martinez from CEQ. We've got a 30th anniversary panel on Saturday for the 1991 Environmental Justice Leadership Summit, with some really great EJ icons joining us for that session as well. Dr. Wilson also mentioned the Donors of Color Network plenary in the afternoon. And so we've got a lot of stuff going on. Check out the agenda. Make sure you get your seats for what's coming up ahead. And if you have any questions, Huva has, you feel free to email us at ceejcenter@gmail.com, but also there are places on Huva where you can ask those general questions as well. So with that, we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll get started at 11:20. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy.